My wife Beatrice was lying in the hospital fighting a losing battle while our daughter Lorraine was boarding a plane to Italy. When I called her that evening, she laughed as if we were discussing weekend plans, not the fact that her mother could barely speak. "The old woman does not have much time left," she said coldly, her voice slurring slightly from whatever she was drinking. "I am not spending my vacation in a hospital, Dad." The words felt like a knife drawn slowly, deliberate and sharp. I sat in Beatrice's father's old leather chair, the same one she had spent years polishing, and stared at the phone screen long after the call ended. The blue glow reflected on my face and made the living room look like a room lit for judgment. The sound of Seattle rain outside filled the silence that Lorraine left behind. It was the kind of rain that could wash away everything except guilt. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if your own daughter left for Italy while your wife was dying in a hospital bed? Let us know where you're listening in the comments. My thumb hovered over her contact photo again. Lorraine was smiling at some corporate event 3 years ago, a champagne flute in her hand, her eyes bright with that practiced confidence people learn in boardrooms. I thought of how she used to smile when she was little, missing front teeth and freckles, proud of every drawing she brought home. The contrast felt unbearable. The notebook on my lap was open to the page I had started 11 days ago. I wrote only one line each day, the way people mark time in prison. Day 11. No visit from Elle. The rain outside was steady, tapping against the glass like fingers reminding me that time was still moving, even though my world had stopped. The house smelled faintly of Beatrice's lavender candles, the ones she had used to mask the scent of medication in her final months. I closed my eyes for a moment and could almost hear her humming in the kitchen, her voice soft and worn, the kind of memory that hurts because it feels alive. When I opened my eyes, the house was only empty again. I pressed call. The phone rang 7 times before she answered. "Dad," she said over a burst of music and laughter. "What's up? Not how are you or how is Mom? Just what's up?" I swallowed hard. "Lorraine, I am calling about your mother." She sighed like someone forced to listen to a dull presentation. "Yeah, I know, but it is loud here. Can this wait?" "No, it cannot," I said. "She keeps asking for you every day." Someone in the background cracked a joke, and she laughed before covering the receiver. When she spoke again, her voice was even more distant. "Dad, work is insane right now. I have a presentation on Monday. I cannot just drop everything." I felt the old ache in my chest that comes when anger and sadness merge into one feeling. "It is not about work. It is about your mother lying in a hospital bed, Lorraine." My voice was shaking, but she did not seem to notice. "Do not start with the guilt talk," she said, irritation creeping in. "Guilt talk? 11 days, Lorraine. 11 days she has been in there and you have not come once." "I am aware of the timeline," she replied sharply. "Thanks." "Are you?" Because she keeps watching the door thinking maybe today her daughter will walk in. Silence. The music behind her was louder now, her world of laughter clashing with mine of slow, dying hours. "That place is depressing," she said at last. "You know I cannot handle hospitals. Your mother handled them just fine when you were 15 and had pneumonia," I said quietly. There was a pause, long enough for guilt to start forming on her end. Or maybe not. That was different. I was a kid. I needed... She stopped. "Needed what?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Care, love, things she does not need now." "I am 41, Dad. Stop trying to control everything I do." Her words were like a door slamming in my face. "Your mother is dying," I said finally. "I know that," she snapped. Do you not think I know that? Her voice was sharp, defensive. Then act like it. I could hear her breathing into the phone, impatient and annoyed. You know what? She said suddenly. I do not need this. I am having one night to relax, and you are calling me with this guilt. With what? I asked, though I already knew. With the truth? The line went dead. The silence after a disconnected call is louder than anything else. It is the sound of finality. The room around me seemed smaller after that. I looked at the photos on the mantel. Beatrice, young, holding baby Lorraine in her arms. Another of Lorraine at 8, dressed as a sunflower for a school play. Beatrice had sewn each yellow petal by hand, staying up until 3 in the morning. There was one of Lorraine at 15, sick in a hospital gown while her mother sat beside her bed. I traced my fingers across the glass, over Beatrice's smiling face. She looked tired even then, but happy to be needed. That photograph belonged to a time when love was enough. I set the frame face down. The sound of it touching the wood echoed like a small confession. The clock struck 8, and the rain outside thickened, harder now, the sound of it like fingernails against glass. My phone buzzed again, but I did not move to check it. I already knew who it was and what it would not say. I just stood there in that dim room, surrounded by the ghosts of who we used to be, waiting for the courage to accept that my daughter had already left us, even before Beatrice's heart stopped beating. The next morning began the same way the last one ended, with rain whispering against the window and silence filling every space that used to hold laughter. I left early, carrying a bouquet of tulips wrapped in white paper, the kind Beatrice loved. The city looked gray and washed out, the kind of morning that blurs everything into shades of regret. The hospital parking lot was half empty, puddles reflecting the sky. I walked the familiar corridor to room 412, the soles of my shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Every nurse knew me by now. Some nodded, some smiled politely, and a few looked away, the way people do when they recognize slow tragedy. When I opened the door, the sound of machines greeted me like an orchestra tuned to sorrow. Beatrice lay still, her skin almost translucent, her breath shallow but steady. "Morning, honey," I whispered. She opened her eyes and smiled faintly. "You are early." "Wanted to beat the traffic," I said, pretending lightness. She noticed the tulips. "You remembered." "Of course." I set them in a vase beside her bed. The yellow petals were already opening, reaching for light that never came. I sat beside her, counting her breaths. The oxygen machine hissed softly. The heart monitor pulsed in green rhythm, steady and defiant. She squeezed my hand weakly. "Is Lorraine coming today?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope that made my throat tighten. "She sent her love," I said quickly. "She is preparing a big presentation for Monday. Important client." Beatrice studied my face the way she always had, quietly, searching beneath words for the truth I was hiding. "Monday is 2 days away," she said gently. "You know how she is. Always wants everything perfect," I replied. She smiled faintly. "She gets that from you." The smile faded as quickly as it came, replaced by exhaustion. The effort of breathing seemed to take all her strength. I wanted to tell her everything, that Lorraine had chosen Italy over her, that she was posting photos of vineyards while her mother's body was failing. But I could not bring myself to destroy what little peace Beatrice still had. Instead, I told her the nurses were kind, the food was better this week, and that the doctors said she was holding strong. Lies spoken out of love are still lies, and I hated myself for them, even as I spoke. The nurse on duty that morning, Margaret, entered quietly with her clipboard. "Morning, Beatrice," she said softly. "How is the pain today?" "Manageable," Beatrice whispered. Margaret adjusted her blanket, checked the monitors, and gave her a reassuring pat on the arm. Then she looked at me, her expression measured but kind. "Can I speak with you for a moment, Mr. Granger?" I followed her out into the corridor, my heart already sinking. She leaned against the wall, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air between us. "I have been doing this job for 17 years, she began carefully. "I have seen a lot of families. I have to tell you, your daughter has not called the nurse's station once in the past 2 weeks. Not once. She has not asked about her mother's condition or medication." Her words struck harder than she knew. "She has a demanding job," I said automatically. "She's under pressure." Margaret's voice stayed calm but firm. "Everyone is under pressure, Mr. Granger. Responsibility begins at home. Beatrice asks about her every day, and it is not fair that you have to lie." I stared at the floor tiles, the white ones with gray flecks, one cracked near my shoe. "I know," I said softly. Margaret touched my arm once, understanding that there was nothing more to say, then walked away, leaving me with the truth pressing against my chest like a weight I could not carry. An hour later, Dr. Rayner approached me with the quiet gait of someone who delivers bad news for a living. "Mr. Granger," he said, clipboard in hand, "can we talk privately?" I nodded. We stepped to the end of the hall. "I am afraid the cancer has spread to her liver. We are looking at 3, maybe 4 weeks if her body responds well to palliative care." His voice was calm, clinical, but it felt like a hammer to my ribs. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, even though I already knew. "It means we are focusing on keeping her comfortable now. You should call your family. Make sure everyone has the chance to say goodbye." I nodded again, unable to speak, then leaned against the wall as he walked away. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, indifferent to human despair. When I returned to Beatrice's room, she was asleep. I sat beside her and held her hand, counting her pulse, watching the rise and fall of her chest. Each breath seemed borrowed from something larger, like time itself was lending her a few more moments before taking them back. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Lorraine's name lit up the screen. I stared at it, but did not answer. She was probably calling to ask if I had fed the cat or to tell me she was at the airport. When the phone stopped vibrating, I turned it face down on the table beside me. I looked at Beatrice again, her hand light as paper in mine, her face peaceful. She stirred slightly and opened her eyes. "You look tired," she murmured. "I am fine," I said, forcing a smile. "You rest?" Her eyes closed again, and she whispered something so faint I barely caught it. "Tell Lorraine I love her." My throat closed. "I will," I whispered back, though we both knew it was a promise that might never be kept. That night I drove home under a curtain of rain, the windshield wipers beating time like a metronome. The house was dark when I arrived, quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. I stood in the foyer for a long time, staring at the framed photographs on the wall. Beatrice at 25, radiant, holding baby Lorraine wrapped in a white blanket. Lorraine at 18, smiling at her high school graduation. They looked like two halves of the same soul. I wondered when that connection had fractured, and how I had missed the moment it broke. Upstairs, the study door creaked as I pushed it open. I sat at my desk and turned on the lamp. The soft yellow light filled the room, touching the stacks of letters, the photo albums, the old will in the drawer. My hand shook as I opened it. Every line of that document gave everything we had to Lorraine. Every cent, every memory, every sacrifice. I closed it slowly and sat back in the chair, listening to the rain. Something inside me shifted, hardening into resolve. Beatrice's life was slipping away while Lorraine chased pleasure across the ocean. It was time to decide what kind of legacy would be left when the rain stopped. The morning came without color. The sky was a flat sheet of silver, and the city felt as though it was holding its breath. I brewed coffee but never tasted it. The decision had been made sometime in the night, quietly, the way heavy things settle when they have nowhere else to go. I sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread before me. Our home had been appraised the previous spring at just over $2.3 million. Our combined savings and investments came to nearly $1.5 million, and Beatrice's life insurance added another $100,000. Altogether, $3.8 million, the sum of a lifetime spent working, saving, and believing that our sacrifices would secure Lorraine's future. But what use was a future to someone who had abandoned her own past? By 8:30, I was dressed in a gray wool coat and standing in the drizzle outside Hargrove and Mason Legal Associates. The brass letters above the door gleamed dully in the wet light. I had known Samuel Hargrove for almost 25 years. He had drafted our first will, attended our anniversary dinners, and watched Lorraine grow up. When I called him the night before, his tone had been grave. "Come in first thing," he said. "We will handle it." Now, as I stepped into his office, the warmth and the smell of polished wood met me like a memory of calmer times. Samuel rose from behind his desk. He was older now, gray at the temples, but his handshake was still firm. "Walter," he said quietly, "I am so sorry about Beatrice. I heard she was not doing well." "She has weeks," I said. "Maybe less." He gestured for me to sit. "Tell me what you need me to do." I placed the old will on his desk and unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases with my palm. "I need to change everything," I said. "Completely." He studied my face before replying. "You understand that if you disinherit your daughter, the decision is irreversible?" "I do," I said. "She made her choice. Now I am making mine." I slid an envelope across the desk, printed photos of Lorraine smiling in Florence, holding wine glasses, walking through sunlit streets, while her mother lay connected to tubes and monitors. Samuel picked up the top photo and stared at it for a long moment before setting it down. "Good God," he murmured. Did she know her mother's condition? "She knew," I said, my voice even. "She called her the old woman. She said she would not waste her vacation on a dying parent." Samuel took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and sighed. "I watched that girl run through my garden with pigtails," he said quietly. "But I understand." He opened a new file. "Let us begin." For the next hour, I answered questions in a low, steady voice. Asset breakdowns, account numbers, property deeds, insurance policy details. Every number and document that Beatrice had organized so carefully in our study now served a new purpose. Samuel typed with the precision of a surgeon, his fingers tapping a rhythm of quiet judgment. When he finished, he read the new will aloud. "I, Walter Granger, being of sound mind and body, intentionally make no provision for my daughter, Lorraine Granger. My entire estate, valued at approximately $3.8 million, shall be used to establish the Beatrice Granger Educational Trust. This trust will provide annual scholarships for students pursuing education degrees within the state of Washington." He paused and looked at me. Are you sure you want it worded that plainly? I want there to be no confusion, I said. No loopholes, no misunderstanding of intent. He nodded and continued reading. This disinheritance is intentional and deliberate, not due to oversight or omission. He printed the pages, each one emerging crisp and white from the laser printer. We will need 2 witnesses who are not family members, he said. I can ask my assistant Linda and our accountant, Ben. They entered moments later, polite but subdued, sensing the gravity of what they were about to witness. Samuel handed me the pen. Once you sign, it becomes binding. The pen felt heavy between my fingers, its tip cold against the paper. I signed with deliberate care, pressing each letter firmly, my name marking the moment everything changed. Linda and Ben added their signatures, then Samuel applied his notary seal. The metallic click of the embosser filled the silence. Samuel set the document aside and looked at me across the desk. It is done, he said quietly. Lorraine will receive nothing. The trust will carry Beatrice's name forever. A strange calm settled over me. It was not satisfaction, not even relief. It was the stillness that comes when something broken is finally beyond repair. There is one more thing, I said after a moment. I want her to understand why. Samuel nodded. I can draft a letter to be attached to the will. No, I said. It must come from me. He handed me a blank sheet of paper. I wrote slowly, choosing every word with care. Lorraine, while your mother was dying, you were walking under the Tuscan sun. You called her the old woman and said her remaining time was not worth interrupting your own. This is not punishment. This is consequence. You will inherit nothing. The entire estate will honor your mother's name by giving hope to children who still understand gratitude. Your father, Walter. When I finished, I folded the letter and handed it to Samuel. Seal this with the will. It should be opened when she returns. He placed both into a manila envelope and sealed it with his firm's crest. She will know, he said quietly. I stood to leave, the envelope's copy tucked under my arm. As I reached the door, Samuel called after me. Walter, you are doing what many fathers cannot do, seeing truth clearly. I paused, then said, Truth does not comfort me, Sam. It just keeps me from lying to myself. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a weak light was breaking through the clouds. I stood on the steps of the building and looked out toward the sound, the water stretching into the gray distance. The city moved as it always did. Cars passing, people rushing, umbrellas folding. Somewhere above those clouds, Lorraine was still sipping wine, posting photographs, laughing with strangers. She had no idea that her life had already changed. The inheritance she had counted on, the future she assumed was hers by right, was gone. Beatrice's name would live on, and Lorraine's would fade into the small print of family history. That night, I returned home and placed the envelope inside the top drawer of my desk. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old wall clock. I poured a small glass of bourbon and stared at the sealed envelope for a long time. It looked harmless, just paper and ink. Yet it held the weight of everything a father can lose. Faith, pride, and the illusion that love is enough to save what has already died. The morning after the will was signed, the sky over Seattle was pale blue for the first time in weeks, as if the weather itself was offering a truce I could not accept. I drove to the hospital with the manila folder still in my briefcase, the engine humming softly under the low hum of morning traffic. The tulips from 2 days ago were still in Beatrice's room, their petals now drooping but still bright, defiant against the sterile walls. She was sleeping when I entered, the blanket rising and falling in slow rhythm. I sat beside her and took her hand, the skin so thin it felt like paper against my palm. Her lips moved faintly, the oxygen mask fogging slightly with each breath. I leaned closer and heard her whisper my name. Not with fear, but with the quiet certainty of someone who already knew where she was going. "I am here, B," I said softly. "Always here." A nurse entered to adjust the IV drip and gave me a small nod, the kind reserved for people who have run out of good news. I stayed there all morning, reading from her favorite book of poems. She stirred occasionally, her eyes fluttering open for a few seconds before drifting closed again. At noon, Dr. Rayner came in, glanced at the monitors, and spoke with that calm, professional tone that made his words hit even harder. "Mr. Granger," he said quietly. "Her body is beginning to shut down. She may not have more than a day or two." The words came like gentle rain, and yet they carried the force of a storm. "Should I call family?" he asked. "No," I said. "There is only one person left to call, and she is not coming." He nodded solemnly, then adjusted the monitor one last time before leaving. The hours passed without measure. I watched the light outside the window shift from gray to amber, and then fade into the deep blue of evening. Beatrice's breathing grew shallower, the pauses between each inhale longer, as though her body was slowly learning how to let go. I wanted to tell her about the trust, about the scholarship that would bear her name, about the children who would one day thank her without ever knowing who she was. But she was too weak for words now. So I sat in silence, holding her hand, letting my thumb trace small circles on her skin, the way she used to do when I could not sleep at night. At some point, she opened her eyes again, clear for a fleeting moment. "Is Lorraine coming?" she asked. The question was a whisper, yet it hit me harder than any shout could have. "Soon, honey," I said, lying because the truth would have broken us both. She smiled faintly, a tired expression of acceptance. "Tell her." She struggled for breath. "Tell her I love her." I nodded, but my throat had closed too tightly to answer. By 6:30, the machines began to tell me what I already knew. The heart monitors slowed, the steady rhythm faltered. Beatrice's fingers twitched once, then relaxed completely. I called for the nurse, but even before she arrived, I felt the change in the room. The air went still, as if time itself had bowed its head. The nurse checked the monitor, pressed her lips together, and said quietly, "She's gone." I stood there, unmoving, watching the woman I'd loved for 42 years vanish into silence. There are no words for that kind of moment. There is only the feeling of space widening between what was and what remains. The nurse covered Beatrice's face gently, turning off the machines one by one until the room was filled with nothing but the sound of my breathing. I leaned over and kissed her forehead. It was still warm, faintly scented with the lavender lotion she always used. "You can rest now," I whispered. "You did everything right." My tears came then, not loud, not violent, but quiet and constant, like the rain that had followed us all our lives. Outside, the streetlights had come on, painting the wet pavement gold. I sat in my car for a long time, unable to start the engine. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. Lorraine's name appeared. The screen showed a photograph from her social media feed. Her standing in a vineyard in Tuscany, a glass of red wine raised in the air, captioned with the words, "Living my best life." The contrast between her world and mine was too sharp to comprehend. Beatrice's heart had stopped beating at the same hour her daughter had lifted that glass to the sky. When I finally drove home, the city was quiet, the streets glistening from an earlier rain. The house felt heavier than ever before. I walked straight to the study and opened the drawer where the envelope lay. I took it out, placed it on the desk, and stared at Beatrice's name embossed on the label. The Beatrice Granger Educational Trust. It looked noble, right? And unbearably sad. "You will live on," I said softly to the empty room, through children who deserved the chance she threw away. I folded the second copy of the will and sealed it in another envelope marked "Open immediately." I placed it carefully on Lorraine's old bed, centered on the pillow she had chosen when she was 16. The room smelled faintly of dust and faint perfume, remnants of a person who no longer existed in any way I could recognize. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the envelope, knowing that it was both a message and a verdict. Tomorrow, she would come home. Tomorrow, she would understand what she had lost. Lorraine's plane landed the next evening just before 8. The sky outside my living room window was dark and heavy with low clouds, the kind that promise another long rain. I sat in the same chair where I had first called her 3 weeks earlier, the same cold coffee beside me, the same silence pressing down on the house. Beatrice's photograph rested on the mantel in a silver frame, a candle flickering beside it. I had not moved it since the night she died. The house no longer smelled like her. Even grief had a way of fading too quickly. I checked the clock. 8:15. If her flight had been on time, Lorraine would be collecting her luggage now. 8:30, she would be in a car heading north from the airport. 9 o'clock, she would walk through that door expecting comfort, pity, or forgiveness. She would find none of them waiting. At 8:45, headlights swept across the living room wall. A car door slammed, followed by the muffled sound of suitcase wheels bumping against the front step. Her key turned in the lock. I did not move from the chair. The door opened and Lorraine stepped inside, the smell of rain and airport perfume following her. Her hair was perfectly arranged, her nails painted a glossy red, her skin tanned from the Italian sun. For a moment, she looked younger, almost like the girl Beatrice used to take to school. Then she saw me sitting there, and the illusion disappeared. "Hi, Dad," she said, dropping her handbag on the floor. "Where's Mom?" The question came casually, as if she had been gone a week instead of years in spirit. I looked at her and said the words slowly, clearly, giving them the weight they deserved. "Your mother is gone." She froze. "What do you mean, gone?" "She passed away 2 nights ago," I said, "at 6:30. She stared at me as if I had spoken another language. No, that cannot be right. I talked to you just last week. You said she was holding on." "She was," I replied, "until she was not." Lorraine's eyes darted around the room, landing on the candle beside Beatrice's photograph. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Finally, she whispered, "Why did no one tell me?" I kept my voice steady. "There was no one to tell. You blocked the hospital's number. You did not answer my calls." She covered her mouth, her face twisting in disbelief. "I was going to visit as soon as I got back," she said weakly. "I just needed a break." "You took one," I said. "Your mother took her last breath while you were taking a photo with a glass of wine." She flinched as though the words had struck her. "You are being cruel," she whispered. "No," I said. "I am being honest." She stepped back, shaking her head. "I cannot deal with this right now. I just got off a plane." She picked up her suitcase and began walking toward the stairs. "We can talk in the morning." I said nothing. I only watched her climb, her steps echoing through the quiet house. I heard the pause as she reached the top landing, the creak of the floorboard outside her room, the soft click of the light switch. Then silence. A long, heavy silence that ended with a gasp. The next sound was the tearing of an envelope, followed by the rustle of papers and a sharp cry that cut through the walls like glass breaking. "What is this?" Her voice was trembling now, high and panicked. "This cannot be real. This cannot be real." I stood and walked slowly toward the stairs, each step deliberate. When I reached her doorway, she was standing beside the bed, the letter trembling in her hands, her face drained of color. The sealed document lay open on the floor beside her suitcase. "Dad," she said, her voice cracking. "Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me this is some kind of cruel joke." I met her eyes. "It is not a joke. It is the truth. You cannot do this," she said. "You cannot cut me out. I am your daughter." "You were," I said. "You stopped being when you called your mother the old woman." The words hit her like a physical blow. She sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the pages in disbelief. $3.8 million, she whispered. "All of it. Gone?" "Not gone," I said quietly. "Given. To the Beatrice Granger Educational Trust. Your mother will help children who value what you threw away." She began to cry. The kind of cry that sounded rehearsed at first, the cry of someone used to getting their way. "I am sorry," she said. "I was tired. I said something awful. I did not mean it." "You meant it enough to fly to Italy while she was dying." "I needed time," she pleaded. "I was under pressure." I looked at her and felt no anger, only a cold kind of clarity. "You had time," I said. "You just chose to spend it somewhere else." She looked up at me, tears streaking her face. "Please, Dad, change it back. You can change it back." "No," I said. "It is done. It is legal. It is permanent." She shook her head violently. "I will contest it. You cannot disinherit your only child." I smiled, not with joy, but with certainty. Samuel Hargrove drafted it. It will stand. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The rain began outside again, light but steady, tapping against her window the way it had on the night of Beatrice's last breath. Finally, she whispered, "What did she say about me before she died?" I swallowed hard. She said, "Tell Lorraine I love her." The words hung between us, soft and unbearable. Lorraine began to sob again, but this time there was something real in it, the kind of grief that comes too late to change anything. I turned and walked out, leaving her sitting there surrounded by her mother's final mercy and her own consequence. Downstairs, I poured a glass of water and stared at the reflection of the candle flame in the window. It trembled, but did not go out. I wondered if forgiveness was still possible in some quiet corner of the universe. Then I thought of Beatrice's voice, gentle but firm, saying that love means nothing without respect. Maybe forgiveness was only for the living, and Beatrice's peace was beyond such things now. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights off, listening to the slow ticking of the clock and the rain sliding down the windows. Lorraine's sobs had faded into silence hours ago. Somewhere upstairs, I could hear the faint creak of the floor as she moved around, restless, lost, perhaps trying to believe the will was some elaborate test she could still pass. But it was not. It was the truth written in ink, signed, sealed, and witnessed. At dawn, the rain stopped, leaving the world gray and quiet. I made coffee, the bitter kind that burns the throat and wakes the mind. then went to the study and pulled out the folder I had kept hidden in the bottom drawer. Inside were 30 printed pages. Her smiling face in Italy, her glass raised, her laughter frozen in light. Dates, captions, and locations, each one a small betrayal of the mother who had died without her. When she came down the stairs around 7, her eyes were red, but her expression had hardened. "We need to talk," she said. I gestured toward the coffee table, where I had laid the first few pages of the folder. "We are talking," I said. She looked down, saw the photographs, and frowned. "What is this?" "Evidence," I said calmly. "Every photograph you posted while your mother was dying." She reached for the first one, a picture of her sitting in a cafe overlooking the Arno River. "I do not understand what you are trying to do," she said. "You are trying to humiliate me." "No," I replied. "I am trying to remind you of what you forgot." I slid another photograph toward her, her standing beneath a stone archway, laughing. This one was taken the same day the doctor told me your mother had 3 weeks left. She tried to speak, but the words tangled. I laid out another, then another. Here you are at the vineyard. Here you are on a boat in Venice. Here you are at a concert. And here, I said, tapping the final page, is your last post. Grateful for this beautiful life. She died the same hour you wrote that. Her hand shook as she dropped the paper. "Stop," she said weakly. "Please, stop." "No," I said. "You need to see it all." I opened the folder wider, revealing the text messages I had printed, my own words begging her to call, to visit, to do something, and her single word replies, "Okay, okay." The sound of those 2 words echoed in my mind like gunshots. She stared at the pages, tears pooling in her eyes again. "I thought she had more time," she whispered. "You thought wrong," I said. "You had time for museums, for wine, for laughter. You had time for everything except the one person who gave you your life." She turned away, gripping the back of the couch as if it could hold her upright. "You cannot hate me forever," she said through trembling lips. "I am still your daughter." "No," I said quietly. "You are a stranger who used to live here." The words came out colder than I intended, but they were true. You took your mother's love and turned it into an inconvenience. You spent years choosing yourself, and then you chose yourself again when she needed you most. "You do not understand," she said. "I was suffocating. She expected too much from me. You both did." I looked at her, really looked, and saw a woman who had built her life around comfort and distance. "Your mother expected only decency," I said. "You could not give even that." For a long moment, she said nothing. The rain had started again, faint against the windows, and the sound filled the space between us. Then she collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "What do I do now?" she whispered. "You live with it," I said. "You live with the knowledge that she waited for you until her last breath and you never came." She looked up at me, her expression hollow. "You do not know what that feels like." "I do," I said softly, "because I was there when she asked for you." Her tears came harder then, but they did not move me. Grief could not erase absence, and regret was not love. I gathered the papers and placed them back into the folder. "These will stay with me," I said. "If you ever think of contesting the will, remember that these exist." She did not answer. She just sat there, staring at the candle still burning by Beatrice's photo, her face pale in the flickering light. I turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. "The funeral is on Saturday at 11, I said quietly. You can come if you want, but you will sit in the back. That is where strangers belong." Her voice broke behind me. "Do you really hate me that much?" "No," I said without turning. "If I hated you, it would mean I still cared." The days between that conversation and the funeral passed like a blur of gray rain and paperwork. I barely remember sleeping. The house felt both too large and too quiet, as though Beatrice's absence had expanded the walls themselves. The dining table remained untouched, her teacup still sitting by the window where she had last left it. Every small thing became a ghost. Her scarf on the coat rack, her handwriting on the refrigerator list, her book still open to the last page she read. I spent those days answering condolence calls, coordinating with the funeral director, and meeting with Samuel Hargrove to finalize the details of the trust. Lorraine remained upstairs, silent behind her closed door. I did not knock, and she did not come down. When the morning of the funeral arrived, the sky over Seattle was a pale silver, neither light nor dark, as though even the sun had decided to keep its distance. The service was held at Morrison and Finch Memorial Chapel, the same place Beatrice and I had attended dozens of other farewells over the years. Now it was hers. The hall was filled with tulips, her favorite, soft yellows and pinks arranged in every corner. The smell was gentle, like spring trying to return after too long a winter. People began arriving slowly, in dark coats and quiet voices. I greeted them with the same steady nod, the same rehearsed words of gratitude. Family, colleagues, former students, faces blurred into a sea of sympathy. I saw Lorraine arrive just as the organ began to play. She wore a black dress and dark sunglasses, even though there was no sunlight. She hesitated at the doorway, scanning the room as if searching for a place that would accept her. There was one empty seat in the back row, and she took it without looking at anyone. The murmurs in the room shifted briefly, like a breeze moving through dry leaves. People noticed. They always do. When the minister finished his opening remarks, he invited me to speak. My legs felt heavy as I walked to the podium, the wood cool beneath my hands. I looked out over the crowd and saw so many faces, all of them looking toward me, waiting for words that could never truly capture the woman I had lost. I cleared my throat. "Beatrice Granger was the best person I have ever known," I began. "She gave her life to others, to her students, her friends, her family. She believed that kindness was not weakness, but strength. She believed in work, in loyalty, in the quiet power of forgiveness." I paused, my voice catching slightly. "She taught me that love is not just what we feel, but what we do." And she kept doing, even when life gave her every reason to stop. I spoke of her 40 years in the classroom, of the children who still wrote her letters years after graduation, of the home she built, and of the laughter that used to fill it. But I never mentioned Lorraine, not once. When I finished, the minister thanked me, and I returned to my seat at the front. As the choir sang softly, I glanced toward the back. Lorraine was staring down at her hands, her shoulders trembling. Aunt Edna, Beatrice's sister, turned her head away pointedly. Cousin Robert whispered something to his wife, who frowned. The unspoken judgment filled the space more effectively than words ever could. When the service ended, people came to me one by one, offering their condolences. Some cried, some hugged me, some said nothing at all. When they passed by Lorraine, they either avoided her eyes or nodded stiffly. No one embraced her. No one called her name. She sat through it all in silence, clutching a tissue in both hands like it might keep her from disappearing entirely. At the cemetery, the wind had picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain. The pastor's words drifted away with it. I stood at the graveside as the casket was lowered, the tulips placed on top, and the first shovel of soil fell. The sound was soft, final. Lorraine stood several yards back, her head bowed, her sunglasses still in place. She did not approach me. When it was over, I waited until the others left before walking to the car. From the rearview mirror, I saw her standing alone by the grave, long after everyone else had gone. But even that did not move me. Some moments cannot be repaired, no matter how long you stand among the ruins. That evening, after the last of the visitors had gone and the house had grown quiet again, Lorraine appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her makeup had run, her eyes were swollen, and her voice was small. "Dad," she said softly, "can we talk?" I looked up from my coffee but said nothing. She stepped closer. "I know you do not believe me, but I loved her. I just did not know how to show it." I studied her face, so much like Beatrice's when she was young, and felt a sharp ache in my chest. "Love without action," I said, "is just a word." She bit her lip and nodded. "I understand," she whispered. "I am leaving tomorrow." I nodded. "You should." She hesitated. "Do you want me to come back later? Maybe we could try to—" "No," I said quietly, not unkindly. "We are finished. I hope you find peace somewhere else." She looked down, tears slipping from behind her lashes. "Goodbye, Dad." "Goodbye, Lorraine." When she left the next morning, I watched her car disappear down the wet street, its red taillights fading into mist. The house was silent again, but it felt different now. Not empty, but clean. As if grief had finally taken what it came for and moved on. That afternoon, I opened the mailbox and found a letter from Samuel Hargrove's office. Inside was a single page on firm cream paper. Confirmation that the Beatrice Granger Educational Trust had been fully registered and funded. It stated that the first scholarships, $5,000 each, would be awarded in September to students from underprivileged schools, children who wanted to become teachers. There was a name typed at the bottom of the page. Maria Gutierrez, age 15, Seattle Public School, 4.0 GPA, aspiring literature teacher. I sat at the kitchen table reading it over and over. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger, not joy, not relief, but a quiet pride. Beatrice's name would live on, not through wealth, not through family, but through purpose. And that, I thought, was better than anything money could buy. 2 weeks after the funeral, I drove across the city under a pale morning sky to visit the school that had received the first scholarship under Beatrice's name. It sat in a quiet part of South Seattle, a modest red brick building surrounded by maple trees just starting to bloom. The sign at the entrance read, Jefferson Secondary School in faded paint. The world had moved on around it, but inside those walls, it still felt like the kind of place Beatrice would have loved, full of young voices, old books, and hope that refused to die. I parked the car, walked past the playground, and found the principal waiting for me in the lobby. She was a tall woman named Mrs. Chen, her handshake firm and warm. "Mr. Granger," she said, "thank you for coming. We are so honored to be the first recipients of the Beatrice Granger Trust." Her voice trembled slightly on Beatrice's name, and for a moment, my throat tightened. She led me down a hallway lined with photographs of students holding awards and science projects. The smell of chalk and floor wax filled the air, strangely comforting. At the end of the hall was a small office where a young girl waited nervously with her mother. "This is Maria Gutierrez," Mrs. Chen said, smiling. "She is our first scholarship recipient." The girl stood when I entered, her dark hair pulled into a neat braid, her hands clutching a folder to her chest. She could not have been more than 15. "Good morning, sir," she said softly. "Thank you for coming." Her mother's eyes were red with pride and exhaustion, the kind of look I had seen in Beatrice's eyes 100 times. I smiled and extended my hand. "Maria, I am the one who should be thanking you," I said. "You are honoring my wife's name by dreaming of becoming a teacher." We sat together, and she spoke shyly about her love for literature and her plan to teach English one day. She said her favorite author was Steinbeck, that she wanted to help other students who grew up the way she did, without much money but full of curiosity. The scholarship, she said, would help her attend a summer writing program she could never have afforded. "Mrs. Granger sounds like someone I would have liked," she added softly. "She must have been a wonderful teacher." I nodded, and for the first time in months, the smile that formed on my face was real. "She was," I said, "and she would have liked you very much." When I left the school, the morning had turned to light rain, thin and steady, the kind Beatrice used to call teaching weather. Soft enough to keep people indoors and quiet enough to make reading sound sacred. I sat in the car and watched the students hurry between buildings, books clutched to their chests, laughter rising in bursts through the damp air. Each one of them felt like an echo of her, not a replacement, not a memory, but something living, carrying her forward in ways that grief could not touch. I realized then that I had spent weeks focusing on what I had lost, never on what she had left behind. The world was full of small, good things if I had only chosen to see them. When I returned home, the house was still quiet, but it no longer felt hollow. I walked into the study where the silver frame still stood. Beatrice's photograph caught the afternoon light, her smile soft, her eyes alive with that calm certainty she always carried. I sat at the desk, opened her favorite notebook, and wrote a letter addressed to no one in particular. "You were right. Love without respect means nothing, and forgiveness is not weakness, but strength. You built a life that mattered, and even in your absence, you are still teaching." I closed the notebook and left it on the desk, beside the candle that had burned down to half its height. Outside, the rain stopped, and sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time that day. The light fell across Beatrice's photo, across the tulips that had just begun to open again in the garden, across the entire quiet house. I stood there watching the world brighten and realized that grief does not end. It changes shape. It becomes memory, duty, and sometimes justice. I whispered her name once, just to feel how it sounded in the air. And then I smiled. That night, before I went to bed, I received an email from Mrs. Chen. She attached a photo of Maria holding her scholarship certificate, her smile wide and proud. The subject line simply read, "Thank you for her name." I looked at it for a long time before replying with 2 words. She earned it. When I turned off the light, the house no longer felt empty. It felt lived in again, warmed by the presence of what Beatrice had left behind. In the end, justice had not come from anger or punishment, but from purpose. I had thought revenge would ease the pain, but what truly healed it was the sight of a young girl given a chance. The same kind of chance Beatrice had once given to everyone she taught. That was the real inheritance. That was love, alive again in a new form. If you like this story, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next one, click on the box on the screen.